In Australia, we do pride ourselves on living in a functional democracy, and we have voices that we don't want to hear, but we do hear them anyway. And we know that there are lobby groups that go and meet with politicians. We know that there are industry groups that get funded to try to shape policies and legislation. We know that some of it is happening undercover, but we have this sense that somebody somewhere is regulating it all, that there are rules around it. Now, what if we had a lobby group that was circumventing all of those rules, that was going in through the back door into government departments and into hundreds of private organisations in Australia, and quietly, without talking to anyone, without getting consent from the majority of people, quietly doing backroom deals and shaping policies and doing it in such a way that companies and organisations are competing with each other to comply with that lobby group's agenda. I don't think it's okay.
Welcome to the New Flesh Podcast, the podcast you deserve. My name is Ricky Orpike, and joining me once again is someone who loves to bring their whole self to work, and that is Mr. Jonathan Astro.
Yeah, Ricky, good. I do like to bring my whole self. I see there being no problem about us spending the first 90 minutes of the day talking about my kinks and my sexual perversions. And that is probably, that makes me a modern man, I would have thought.
Excellent. Well, can you believe we're talking about trans issues again on this show?
Trans issues. Yeah, it's come up. It's come up a bit. So yeah, I can believe it. Yep. I can. But today we are talking to
Kit Kowalski,
who's done an enormous amount of research, so you don't have to, about a organisation called ACON, which you should know about, and you will know about after this podcast. That's it, Ricky.
Let's do it.
Okay. Kit Kowalski is a writer and mother who describes herself as an adult human Sheila. I should probably explain Sheila to our American audience. It just means a woman, all right? Kit has devoted considerable time and effort on her blog and YouTube channel to exploring the inner workings of ACON, also known as the AIDS Council of New South Wales, which we're going to talk about today, and their influence on organisations in Australia, such as the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, our ABC. We're delighted to have her on the show to take a deep dive into ACON and other surrounding issues. Kit, welcome to the New Flesh.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a very exciting time.
Well, I think it's fair to say we're platforming you. Isn't that? Don't you like that when people say I'm platforming you?
I don't want to get into any platforming.
Yeah,
no platforming.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, women's rights campaigner Kelly J. Keane was in Australia recently on her Let Women Speak tour. Now, I was there for the Melbourne leg, and John, you caught the Sydney version. Did you happen to attend any of these rallies, and what did you make of the way they were covered in the mainstream media?
I actually wasn't able to attend because I had a child's birthday party on at the same time. But I obviously had a lot of friends who were going along, and the Sydney one especially, they described it as very peaceful, and their biggest complaint was being out in the sun too long.
It was hot.
And the police had positioned all the trans activists in the shade. So the way that they were covered in the mainstream media is, it's to be expected, but it was abysmal. We've got women who are standing up and talking about their rights. And the Melbourne one in particular, it was crashed by a bunch of neo-Nazis who, I was listening to one of them talk about the protest last night on an interview that he gave. And he actually said, we were there to protest the trans activists, and I think there were some TERFs there. We didn't really take notice of them.
We really are in our own silos, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. And the mainstream media essentially have said, this is a far-right protest. The far-right are anti-trans, and therefore any of the women who are speaking up about their rights. And we've got, lesbians, we've got domestic abuse survivors, we've got mothers, we've got teachers, and they've all been tarred with this far-right brush. It's and the media are only interviewing the trans activist side. It's appalling.
Well, just to give our listeners a sense of what the Melbourne rally was like, the counter protesters were obviously off the chain. They exhibited awful and unhinged behaviour, including throwing feces-infused water around, yelling the usual slurs and swearing, as well as making a serious push against the police. And I don't know if this made the media, but one protester actually infiltrated the inner circle of speakers and knocked a middle-aged woman down to take hold of the mic and scream pro-trans propaganda. And then, as you say, the right-wing neo-Nazis turned up, complete with their salutes, which were in no way connected with Kelly J's event. But yeah, as you can imagine, the media have tentatively linked the two as having, as being linked together. These dumb neo-Nazis with Kelly J's event here. Are you surprised at all that Melbourne got so out of hand?
Not at all. I mean, Melbourne has always been a very sort of politically active and very, street-based action city. I was remarking that there's no coincidence that the Royal Commission into the Building Industry focused on Melbourne. It's just the kind of city that it is. Whereas in Sydney, we really don't go out for anything unless we're being charged $150 for a ticket, and we're going to have a really good time.
Fireworks.
We need fireworks.
Yeah.
But in Melbourne, it seems like they just have a surfeit of these bored men who go to the gym a little bit too often, and then they want to go and show off their muscles to someone.
Well, we'll move off Kelly J in just a second, but I just think it's interesting because as you mentioned, the focus from the media seems to be all on these supposed neo-Nazis and now the possible expulsion of a Liberal MP, Moira Deeming, for attending the rally. Ricky, you were there too, so maybe I should expel you from this podcast. But we'll talk about that later. But what I haven't seen in any of the packages are the words of the women who got up to speak. Do you think that there'll be a tipping point where the attempts to shut down this kind of debate will sort of fail?
There has to be, and I think the question is when we reach that tipping point. I think the genius of having Kelly J Keen in Australia is that she doesn't really care who she upsets, but she gets people talking. And in Australia, that meant pushing it to quite a catastrophic point where we had neo-Nazis turn up. We have an MP who's going to be expelled from her party. We had all sorts of chaotic events happening, but it is being reported in the press now. I think it's going to take a little bit more to actually get to a stage where we get to listen to what those women have to say. And it's going to be a lot of courage inside those newsrooms.
Well, we are going to spend a bit of time today talking about ACON, and no doubt you get this question a lot. Why ACON? I think of my sister here, who's not at all aware or involved in the culture wars at all, and she would say, "Why am I listening to this? Why? In fact, when I recount all of this to her at some point, she's going to say, Why are you speaking these words to me? So perhaps you can explain to people like my sister why they should be paying attention.
Yeah, actually, when you sort of step back a little bit, there are a couple of different ways to view the research that I've been doing. And one of those ways would be that I'm some sort of crazy tinfoil hat wearing homophobe who, hates people getting assistance with HIV. That can't really be further from the truth. I grew up in a very, what we call, liberal household. And, I won't go too much into my background, but suffice it to say that I'm not coming from a place of homophobia at all. But I suppose what I would say to your sister is that in Australia, we do pride ourselves on living in a functional democracy. And we have voices that we don't want to hear, but we do hear them anyway. And we know that there are lobby groups that go and meet with politicians. We know that there are industry groups that get funded to try to shape policies and legislation. And we know that some of it is happening undercover. But we have this sense that somebody somewhere is regulating it all, that there are rules around it. Now, what if we had a lobby group that was circumventing all of those rules, that was going in through the back door into government departments and into hundreds of private organisations in Australia, and quietly, without talking to anyone, without getting consent from the majority of people, quietly doing backroom deals and shaping policies, and doing it in such a way that companies and organisations are competing with each other to comply with that lobby group's agenda? I don't think it's okay. I think that lobbying does exist in Australia, and it should be above board. It should be regulated, and there should be rules around it. And that if we have groups, we have interest groups that are going into government departments that are shaping policies, and they're shaping the culture of these departments, and they're shaping literally the thoughts of the public servants who are interpreting our legislation, then they should be accountable for that.
And on one of your slides, on one of your videos, you've got this great summary of these why questions, which I think are which are fascinating, because these are the things you're not allowed to ask. Why doesn't the ABC report on the negative side of gender ID? Why doesn't the SBS? Why do they keep platforming Jordan Rasco, which is a comedian and performer? Why didn't the AHRC support Sal Grover, another one of our guests? Who wrote the trans inclusion sport guidelines? Why does Department of Defence fully fund sex reassignment surgery? Why do Coles and Woolies offer transition leave that covers getting a new haircut? Why can't the LWHS say breastfeeding on Facebook? Why are men in women's prisons? And we go on and on. So I think I love these questions, because it seems that today asking questions about why is something that you're not allowed to do.
100%. And, I came across somebody putting forward the Voltaire quote today, if you want to know who rules you, find out who you're not allowed to question. And at this point, it's literally the trans lobby. I also had something come across my feed that 2010, which it used to be sort of a halfway house service for gay youth, they put out a little tile saying that trans people are a gift that we should be thankful for. Now, I'm thankful for everyone in my life, but no one in particular just because they're transgender. I try to look at, a whole person, whereas I think treating these people as though they are a special, elevated class of person that have some knowledge that we don't have, that's literally describing a new priest class. And frankly, I'm not interested in that religion, and I'm not interested in that religion controlling my workplace or the government.
Well, let's turn our attention now to ACON. I want to cover a few basic things first. Can you tell us what is ACON and what do they do?
So ACON are the AIDS Council of New South Wales. Each state and territory has an AIDS council or an AIDS organisation, and they're federated together under a body called the Australian Federation of AIDS Organisations. And that also includes sex worker advocacy and injecting drug user advocacy, because they're all concerned with people who are vulnerable to getting HIV and AIDS. At the last figures that I have, published by that body, AFAO, show that our national infection rates for HIV are sitting at less than 1,000 per year, AIDS is still a problem, and the biggest demographic that are at risk are people who are coming in from overseas. So a lot of that AIDS prevention work is focused on reaching, and it's focused on education, test, take PrEP. That's pretty much it these days. They don't talk about condoms anymore. So a lot of what ACON actually does is focused around community building, so reducing the stigma of people who are HIV positive, reducing the stigma around testing, and the stigma around talking around it, about STIs. They also do a lot of education, and in 2008, they started up a project called Pride in Diversity and their original mission in Pride and Diversity was to bring this community building and this stigma reduction into Australian workplaces. So kind of like make it okay to be gay in the workplace. And by all accounts, they did get a lot of doors slammed in their faces. They were, people were like, we don't want to talk about this stuff at work, leave it at home. It's not really appropriate. So it was if you remember back to 2008, I'm not sure if it was that much of a different time, but we definitely didn't talk about sex in the workplace as much as we do today.
We lead with it now. You say last night, you should have seen what I got up to last night, and then the person says you got the job.
I'll have to try that in my next interview.
It'll work. But I was going to say, you mentioned AIDS. I think before we move off AIDS, look, I'm not going to say we beat AIDS, but I think it's fair to say, coming from some of the lobby groups, there's been this idea that it's not a death sentence. That's been a very successful campaign, this idea it's not a death. Because I remember there being storylines in a very old program called ER where someone would get AIDS and then it would be, it would take over their whole narrative arc. Whereas now, as you say, there's a lot we can do. So the fact that AIDS is still in their name, ACON's name, and they've had this pivot, dare I say, but sort of hidden the word AIDS away the way KFC hides the word fried. Are they trying to avoid anyone saying, what do we need you guys for? Am I being too harsh?
It's a fair bet. It's a fair bet that that's what they're doing. Like they're free branded. Because now, of course, if you look at their annual report, their mission is still really about HIV/AIDS, gay men, other groups of men who have gay sex with men. But then all the activities that they're doing, they're very much community building, trans positive, trans promotion, and promoting the pride and diversity piece. That's their big growth area.
It's just weird because gay men are, I would argue, from their point of view, straight adjacent. I would say that you know what I mean? That gay men should be at the end of that long alphabet soup, really, I would have thought.
Well, they don't even have to put the toilet seat down. I mean...
I know, that's a privilege in itself.
Now, is ACON only a New South Wales organisation, or do they have plans to expand to other Australian states? Do they have any sort of national role?
Well, this is where we get to the many faces of ACON. So ACON is a New South Wales organisation, but their reach is national. So their Pride and Diversity program, it is a national program, and any organisation from across the country can join. And so they do. They have government agencies from other states. They have national government agencies, and they have private companies who are operating all over Australia and even globally who are members.
And how are they funded?
So ACON gets a lot of money from New South Wales Health. And this is essentially for health programs and for HIV/AIDS prevention. They get roughly $13-14 million a year, and then they get another $4 million or so from other government. So they just have a big bucket that they report as other government. So that's sort of $16-17 million from the government going into ACON. But then they also yield $4 million from goods and services. Now, I believe a huge chunk of that is coming from membership fees and training revenue paid by these Pride and Diversity members, many of whom are government agencies or local councils or even not-for-profits or sporting organisations. And they get consultancy as well. So they do membership, training, consultancy, and I think a large chunk of that $4 million comes from there. So their budget is $21 million a year.
Yeah, well, you've done extensive investigative work to piece together how ACON is funded, what organisations are involved in their scheme, and what their organisational structure is. Can you give us an insight into how you've done this research and whether you've had any pushback to it?
Yeah, so a lot of the research that I do is publicly available materials. So just combing through annual reports, combing through archived versions of their website, downloading their documents and reading them, and then there was a large chunk of the research that was based on documents obtained under Freedom of Information requests. So that started some time ago, probably middle of 2021, where I got pulled into a big group of people, maybe 20 people, and we were like, right, we're going to FOI all of the government agencies that have participated in ACON's annual AWEI, that's the Australian Workplace Equality Index benchmarking scheme. And so everyone sent off all these FOIs, and then some of them came back, some of them didn't, and they were just sitting in a big pile. And I was sort of the chump who sat down and read them all and started to try to piece it all together. And I've got to come clean here. I was skeptical. I was really skeptical that I'd find anything. I thought it was a bit paranoid. So, I thought, look, I've been involved in benchmarking schemes before through various employers, and they're fairly run-of-the-mill these days. It's a way for companies to outsource their integrity in a way. So, we're not really experts on including women. We're not really experts on like racial harmony. Okay, we'll get a benchmarking index, and then they'll give us the tick, and we'll be able to say, yes, we're not racist, we're not sexist, we're not homophobic. Good on us. But then actually reading through the questions, there were so many red flags that came up. And when I started adding up all of the available points and putting them into sections and sort of which buckets got more points than others, it became really clear that ACON's agenda isn't to help agencies mature in their LGBTQ acceptance. There was something else going on there.
Well, you mentioned the word expertise, and I would like to know how one becomes an expert in LGBTQ sexuality and gender, because, for instance, is there a course that you have to take, or, can I become an expert in heterosexuality?
I think it's a little bit like your pronouns or your gender identity. You feel it deeply inside you, and you declare it.
So it's a lived experience thing, isn't it?
It seems to be. So if we look at Pride and Diversity, that was founded by a woman called Dawn Emson Hoff, and she seems to be kind of have a bit of a research background, and it was modelled off the Stonewall Diversity Champion scheme in the UK. But then everybody else who's involved in that Pride and Diversity scheme, all of the relationship managers, the reason that they are on board is because they started a Pride network in their organisation, and then they were recruited into Pride and Diversity. That's the thing that they all have in common, is that they're all very charming, likeable, persuasive people who know how to network and who know how to push the buttons. Very few of them are experts in health, equality, employment law, gender. They're literally all people who are able to organise other people.
I'm fascinated at this point because, we spend a lot of time talking about, obviously, in this space, and I'm interested in what level of ideologue I'm dealing with when it comes to these sorts of outfits. And I wanted to know whether, how close to a round table of bad guys is it? Or is it just the Australian version, which is we copied and pasted some stuff from Stonewall, we're not ideologues. We sort of agree. We sort of believe in high status ideas, which at the moment are these things. And to be honest, I just like nice things. And yeah, we like a nice little club. So I just wanted to get your sense of who actually is in these rooms?
Yeah.
Not that you have a crystal ball or that you're godlike, but because when we talk about it from the outside here, I honestly picture that the round table and I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying to go, okay, no, it's clearly this is normal people. I probably run into them and they just think they've got another word for it is what they do. They wouldn't say, I'm an ideologue. I work at ACON and, we're into grooming. They wouldn't say all of that. They'd say, I'm in development or something or,
Well, I'd say it is a mixed bag. Like they're not a monolith, but they really are true believers. And so I had I don't know if it was I won't call it a pleasure, but I had the experience of watching a recording of some of their training videos. So to set the scene, this is their LGBTQ train the trainer. So they're training people who are going to go back into their workplaces and deliver the training. So it's a 1-hour training, and they take 7 working days to break it all down and to make sure everyone's on board with the message. Now, in the session I watched, there was actually 4 new starters to ACON who were there, and they were receiving the message at the same time. So it was really interesting to see them when they stood outside or stepped outside of like the narrative, how they were pulled back into the narrative. And I would say that they are absolutely true believers. And you have the lead trainer, Nikki Elkin. She doesn't enjoy people disagreeing with her. I've seen footage of her mocking women who would like to have single-sex spaces. She thinks that anyone who isn't fully on board with the LGBTQ agenda or narrative is some ill-educated ochre moron from the sticks. She can't imagine that anyone would disagree with what she's doing. And I suppose that's the most charitable way to say it, is that they honestly can't imagine that they're doing the wrong thing.
Is it too far to say it's cult-like?
One of the interesting things about the ACON Pride and Diversity relationship managers and trainers is they're there to set the tone, and they're there to lead organisations in how to interpret like ACON's requests for certain activities in the Australian Workplace Equality Index. Now, most of them have some sort of skin in the game, right? So they're either like gay or lesbian, or they're transgender. So there are a couple of trans women, or they have trans siblings or trans family. So they're absolutely all on board with this Protect Trans Lives mantra. There are 2 women in particular, Ellie Watts and Nikki Elkin, who were, I think Ellie Watts is possibly, I'm not sure what her claim to the LGBTQ is, but Nikki Elkin was a lesbian, and through their work at ACON Pride and Diversity, they discovered that they were really non-binary. So through going through this process and actually participating in all of these activities of promoting non-binaryism, they have now taken on a non-binary identity. So yes, I would say there was a strong element of influence there.
In this Pride and Diversity scheme, this is pay for play. You pay for this, right? And it's the numbers are $6,000 or $10,000 annually. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's 2 different ways you can participate. You can be a member, and that is $6,000, and then you don't really need to do anything else. You can be I think they're still calling it a principal member, which is $10,000. You get exactly the same thing, and you don't have to do anything else. And then there is the Australian Workplace Equality Index, which you don't have to pay for directly, and you don't have to be a member for, but it helps if you are. And that is where you don't actually give any money to ACON necessarily, but it costs you a lot in terms of time and effort and resources.
I understand that the Australian Workplace Equity Index involves gaining points and doing things to get points. Do you get points for also being a contributor to the Pride and Diversity arm?
So they're really clever the way that they do it, actually. So they make everything very, very optional. But there are two opportunities for an organisation to declare that they are using Pride and Diversity services. And one is that you get 2 points for engaging external LGBTQ expertise. And if you're a member of Pride and Diversity, you can just tick the box, no questions asked. If you're not a member, you have to write down who it is, and they have to be accredited with Pride and Diversity. So they're happy to create the market if they're controlling the market. And then the other one is training as well. So you have to buy some sort of training, LGBTQ training for your staff. And again, you can have the Pride and Diversity, or you can have another provider as long as they're accredited.
So ACON is a charity, but it has this advocacy lobbying offshoot to their structure. Are there any calls to break this up into two organisations? Because I can't really see the link between AIDS awareness and prevention and, say, the Drag Queen Story Hour type programs that are appearing on ABC Kids TV. Is anyone other than you questioning this?
Well, they would probably say that they would probably deny that there is a link between. They would probably say exactly the same thing if questioned. So what ACON doesn't say to ABC, oh, look, you should have a program about Drag Queen Story Hour and make it really positive. They say you'll get points if you have positive representations of LGBTQ in the media. Now, ABC is the media, so that's convenient. Or if you, as an employer, do extra additional things to promote LGBTQ in your workplace and to the broader community. And so ABC is a national employer, it is the media, and it basically reflects the Australian community. So that's very convenient to them. They do these things seemingly off their own bat and with the advice of a relationship manager. So on paper, ACON just provides the opportunity for ABC to get a point by doing something positive. So they would absolutely deny that they're asking the ABC to promote Drag Queen Story Hour.
But they do reward it though with points.
They do. Yeah. They do, 100%.
Wow. This is like something you do for your kids though. This is a points board. It's saying, finish your vegetables, you get a point. Listen to this drag queen moan on about transitioning, you get 4 points. I know I was conflating a bit there, but isn't it like that?
I don't want to go for dinner in your house.
Bigotry is alive and well on this podcast.
Can you give us a sense of what a point is worth in ACON's scheme? For instance, like what is having a trans flag in your shop front worth in terms of points?
What can I get? You want to know what can I get? What can I get out of this?
Look, I would probably I would probably award you 1 point for that as additional work.
What if it was a really big flag?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work like that. So I have there are specific questions and there's guidance about each of the specific questions, and they want you to meet very strict criteria. Now, so it's funny, they actually call this an evidence-based activity. So usually when something's evidence-based, it means there's evidence that backs up me asking you to do this and evidence that it works. Whereas in their case, they actually mean they ask you for evidence that you did it. So if you put a big pride flag in your shop, I might give you 1 point for that. So one of my favourite examples is the CEO or equivalent at a speaking event. Okay, most people would say, oh, well, that's what the CEO goes out, spends half an hour giving a speech. That's worth the 2 points, right? But if you work in a government agency or if you work in a multinational corporation, first of all, you have a team of people who evaluate the opportunity, right? Should we do it? Should we not? Then you have a team of people who talk about the themes and where does LGBTQ align with our mission and and our values, and where can we contribute? And then you have senior speechwriters who sit down and they write the talk for the CEO. Then you have the CEO who takes time out to learn the speech and then to actually go and deliver it and answer questions. And then you have to deal with any media, hopefully positive, possibly negative. Maybe the CEO said something that didn't actually please the LGBTQ community, and there's something negative has come out of it. So you think about the time and the effort and the money and the resources from the government that are being diverted to win that 2 points out of 200. So points are not worth very much.
So that, just to clarify, that's worth 2 points, is it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
The Australian Taxation Office, they have an annual practice of providing pro bono or financial support to LGBTQ charities / organisations worth 2 points. What they do is every year they give $11,000 to sponsor the AWEI Awards Gala, and they get 2 points for that. Now, $11,000, like in the scheme of things, it's not a lot of money in their operating budget, but why do they get it and why not the RSPCA? Why not Greenpeace? Why not anyone else? Why is this just earmarked for this particular awards dinner? It's not even preventing HIV. It's literally buying canapes that they also buy tickets to attend the same awards dinner for people to eat the canapes that they've already purchased by sponsoring the dinner.
This reminds me a little bit of Time Zone when you were a kid, and you'd play these games for ages just to get these little tickets that come out, but you'd need 1 million of them just to get some dumb toy from the shop. It's wow.
It's a lot amazing. Like that. So ABC, for example, in 2022, they scored gold ranking with 177 points. They did a lot more work.
They can get with that one.
Yeah,
a lot of tickets. They did a lot more work than they did the previous year, 2021, when they scored a gold ranking for 177 points.
Is ABC, are they leading the way? Do they have the most points?
They are pretty high up there. SBS have been going at it longer, and they kind of have it down pat. So I think they've got probably they're neck and neck maybe. So
I mean, if those two outfits can't get top marks in this field, they are working overtime. I'm sure they are thinking about this all the time. If they can't smash it, who can?
Well, the ABC have they have a department called ABC Queer, and they have a literal department that is dedicated to pumping out queer-focused content for the queer community.
But the penalties are so great, and which I'm sure you're going to get to, which is it just seems. On one hand, I'm so impressed by the pluck of these people to come up with this sort of mechanic they've created, where they're in charge of they create the marketplace, they're in charge of it, create a point system, but the apportioning of the points or the breakdown of the points in terms of what you have to give and what you have to get is a little silly. You know what I mean? Like we've already talked about it, but if you can get Gillan McLaughlin to come down as the head of the AFL, our national sport here in Australia for our overseas listeners, if you can get the head of that outfit to talk, that should be worth a lot. And a flag in your window, yes, should be worth one point. So I don't understand. I'm so confused, and perhaps you can talk about the penalties, because if you have a misstep, if you're, with the rugby, if your team, someone in your team says, "I'm not going to wear the pride jumper," and then you go, "Oh, this is terrible," and then you would lose quite a lot of points for that, right?
So in the Australian Workplace Equality Index, the very first question, it's not even a question, it's just the first thing that you have to declare is, you have to give details of any negative media coverage on LGBTQ issues that involved your organisation in the past 12 months. And the penalty is up to 25 points. So to put this in perspective, so we have you have total available points is 200, and in 2022 you had to get 174 to get gold ranking, and 155 to get silver, 107 to get bronze. So, and below that you're just a participant. So even if you're at 200, which no one is going to reach 200, and you lose 25 points, then you've lost, you're on the way to sort of a second ranking.
Wow.
It's catastrophic. And when you're looking at organisations who literally are the media, so we're talking about Channel 10, SBS and ABC specifically, it's in their interests to downplay any stories that might be negative, that might have a negative connotation on the LGBTQ umbrella. Like, it's in their interests to overcompensate by having all these positive stories. And by the way, ACON doesn't add it all up and say, oh, but you had a lot of really positive stories and a lot of, and one really negative story, so we'll make it even. No, they will take those points off you if you have one misstep.
Wow. And that accrues, so if you have two missteps, that's 50?
I'm not sure. Nobody has actually reported one that I have seen. So...
Well, some of the things that ACON are encouraging organisations to do seems pretty niche, and one that stood out to me was that they advocate for gender affirmation leave, which is paid leave outside of sick leave, annual leave and maternity leave. So if you come out as non-binary, gender fluid, trans, bisexual, or any other of the increasing number of gender identities, you get time off work. And I'm not sure how that really works when you're gender fluid, but I guess you could get multiple time off. I don't know. Can you give us an insight into some of the ideas that they're pushing on workplaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So, gender affirmation leave is one of the things that they say that you should have as a standard, essentially. Like, it should just be a standard kind of leave, like parental leave or, having sick days. And then we bring in this idea that you shouldn't gatekeep people's identities. So that means that usually, so if I were to, have a baby, for example, I would present a medical certificate to my workplace and I'd say, I'm pregnant, my due date is this, I'm going to need some leave. I would evidence that. If I broke my leg, I would evidence that to my workplace. And they would want to know that I was genuinely sick or unable to attend work. But if we bring in this idea of not gatekeeping identities, then a lot of these organisations, they're choosing to interpret this request in a really, really expansive way. And so the most common thing that I'm seeing is you get 10 days leave, you can use it for whatever you want, you can break it up, you don't have to take it in one go like you would, say maternity leave, for example, and you don't have to evidence the reasons why you're away. We're not going to gatekeep that. So we're not going to ask you if it's for surgery. We're not going to ask you if it's for getting a haircut. You can use it to get a haircut because that's part of your identity expression. And they train organisations that your identity expression is just as important as any other part of your sexual being or your identity. So
don't they have to remove this idea of evidence for a couple of reasons? One would be just biological reality. So you might not be able to biologically prove a certain thing. You know what I mean? Like, I can't biologically prove to you that I'm a woman. In fact, although I do expect that you will respect my choices. And the second thing is, if you did have to provide evidence, then what are you going to do? You're going to go in there and say, it's going to open up all the bad old things. I'm going to go in and say, anyway, I really like Barbra Streisand. Here's this vinyl record I bought. I love these glittery shoes. They're good too. And then I'm going into, like, I like to wear this kind of lipstick. We're going into this sort of grotesque performance of gender, or at least going down that route. So isn't it in their interest to get that off the table? We need to go, okay, well, that's not going to work. We just need what we want is no questions.
Yeah, 100%. And if we look at some of their training courses, that's one of the things that they really drill into people, is that your identity is paramount. You mustn't question someone on their identity. What their identity means to them is what it means to them, and it's none of anyone else's business. But, could you imagine working in HR these days and someone comes to you and says, oh, well, I want some time off to go shopping and get a haircut. And your policy actually says, yes, you have to let them, and also you have to give them a bonus to go shopping. And that is something I have seen in some of the private companies, is that they give a wardrobe bonus when you transition gender as well. So, if you have an amputation, do you get a wardrobe bonus to get, clothes that fit you now? No, you don't. This is all dealt with in other ways in Australia.
I've sort of heard you talk about this, I think, on Sal Grover's Giggle podcast. You guys had a great discussion about this topic. I'd encourage everyone to listen to that episode. And I think Sal was talking about people being entrepreneurs and running businesses, and the business realities of having to hire and manage people, using these sorts of things. I mean, my first thought when all of this is coming up, if I've got someone who knows all of this stuff, is across all of this, and is coming in and saying, anyway, just want to check out your policy about gender affirmation, for no other reason, I would be thinking a giant neon sign above their head would be going blinking, and it would say high maintenance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons that a lot of organisations do join Pride and Diversity, so they can put a badge on their website that says, we're an LGBTQ friendly employer. And that's really what you pay that $6,000 for, is to put the badge on your website that says, if you're LGBTQ, you're welcome here, right? Whereas, you're struggling mum and pop shop, it's sort of that millennium syndrome, isn't it? I don't want to work. I've got no experience. I just want to go straight to the CEO role. Oh, and by the way, where's my gender transition leave?
That is something our generation would ask for, definitely.
But that badge they receive, what difference does that make to that particular organisation or business? I mean, is that quantifiable? Can people see that, before the business, we made this much. After we got the symbol, we got the badge, we put it on a website, we made this much.
We sold this many, chocolate bars, and now we've sold this many chocolate bars because of the gay stuff or whatever.
I tell you what, it's only going to cost you, because you are not going to increase productivity using this badge, and no one ever claims it. It's under the umbrella of those ethereal employee wellbeing claims. And it goes along with a cultural shift in HR more generally. So these days we talk a lot more about employee welfare and well-being, and everybody being on the team or part of the family or pulling together, and we're all going out to paintball.
Bringing their whole self to work.
Yes.
We're bringing our whole self to work. We're bringing our dogs to work now. Sorry, I'm not a dog person.
But what if I'm Charles Manson and I want to bring my whole self to work? You know what I mean?
Is that under the LGBTQ umbrella?
Yeah, I don't know if that's under Kit's expertise.
If we could make it into a kink, it's probably okay.
That's true. That is true, though. That's now. But this is interesting, though, Kit, because we're talking about a shift that's happened at workplaces where, yeah, absolutely. Talk about your kinks. Let's go into a lot of detail, and you should be telling me about what you did sexually last night, and about who, with, and how, and everything. Whereas I'm just so confused. I thought, I would prefer, and I don't know what everyone else. You tell me what you guys think. I just want to go to work. I want to do the work. And I definitely don't want to hang out with you. I definitely don't want to do that. You know what I mean? If we're friends, yeah, I'll be friends with one of you because you're a great person or whatever. But the rest of them, they can go to hell. And I don't want to do anything fun. I don't want to talk about anything fun. And let's do the work 100%. And stop interrupting me, please, as well.
So you're not bringing in a birthday cake. For your
I don't
birthday?
care if it's Ryan's birthday. I don't want him to have a cake. Let's not do it. Let's get back to work. Let's go.
I'm probably on the middle ground. I quite like the cake, but I have worked in places where like there's cake like every week, and it gets ridiculous. Like, can we just stop downing tools to go and eat cake? Like, I have deliverables.
But it seems when you scratch the surface of ACON, you see that this is just one big financial feedback loop. ACON outlines the standards of their workplace equity index, and organisations that are signed up have to, try and meet those standards. And many of the ways they can earn points in the scheme involve throwing money at LGBT consultants, diversity training, workplace seminars, and recognising all of these special queer days like World Pride Day, as well as donating to queer charities. And on top of all that, they're encouraged to employ more and more trans and queer staff. I've got two questions on this. Are there aspects of this business model that are illegal or at least unethical? And are organisations aware of this huge financial grift going on?
I think I have to disappointingly say I can't comment very well on either of those. Whether it's illegal, I'm not in a position to say one way or the other. But I will say that the way that it's all phrased is very artful. So ACON never says you have to give us money in order to win these points. They say you have to give somebody some support. And then I imagine that's where the relationship manager comes in and sort of says, well, okay, what you need to do is you need to go and buy a marquee, a World Pride Day, and that's going to cost you, I'm not sure how much it costs you. One example I will give is Attorney General's department sponsored a session at Queer Screen Australia. Now, Attorney General's department is in Canberra. Queer Screen was taking place in Sydney. They sponsored a session and it cost $4,000, and they got their 2 points for that. So they had to, and I think what actually happens is that it creates a little bit of a scarcity in the LGBTQ consultancy arena. So you have all these really small organisations like Agender Agenda, like Transfolk WA, Transgender Victoria, and it creates work for them. And so, it's quite cronyistic in a way, yeah. And are organisations aware of it? No. I would say that very few people who work in the organisations where this is taken hold are aware of exactly what is going on. It's all done very quietly, and I would say very few people are aware of the implications.
So all down the streets of inner city Sydney recently, there are pride and trans flags, and I only just moved to Sydney, so I was quite shocked. I've come from a place a very woke place in Melbourne, but still, I wasn't quite prepared for the way they went hard here at World Pride. And I saw for the first time ACON branded flags all the way down, must have been in King's Cross. So many of them, huge, and they said from ACON with love or something. We've talked about these ever increasing workplace schemes and diversity training sessions, days of celebration. Is it fair to say that there's some sort of queer economy going on, and how profitable do you think it is?
There's definitely a queer economy. So if you look at it, and it's all to do with like the commodification of identity and these outward symbols of identity. So one example I have from ABC is that they bought some rainbow lanyards and mouse mats and whatever to give to their staff. So they paid money to get some merchandise printed up, and they also added in their submission that they got them from a queer-friendly supplier, right? So it's not enough to just get the rainbow printed onto something.
It's got to be authentically made by someone in the community.
A queer artisan.
Queer. I'm like, was this even made by a queer person or what?
Well, and that's the thing. Maybe maybe those people had to be accredited that they have genuine queer people working in their
because to be frank, some of this stuff would probably be more appropriate. It would probably on the back it would say made by Chinese people or Uyghurs or people with nothing in Foxconn in some sweatshop is where it was made, and where it was cynically conceived of is some place in Paddington.
Well, that's where we stop at queer-owned businesses, because we don't want to look too hard at, what's actually going on underneath, like all those labour practices and all that exploitation. And the environmental impact of buying all of this rainbow ticky-tack, yeah.
This show bag nonsense.
Yeah. Where are all those flags going to go at the end of...
I hope to a queer landfill somewhere.
Maybe they go to queer
landfill.
Orphanages. I'm not sure. Like they're helping, distressed queer orphans, or maybe queer puppies. Definitely. So it's again like it's commodification, but it's also like the search for authenticity and identity. So it's not enough just to buy. We have to buy in an authentic way of someone who is authentic and who has a genuine like queer identity. And if you can come along like these little groups do, and you can capitalize on that, and you can say, well, we're the keepers of the queer. We're the ones who know we can get you genuine trans merchandise, or this merchandise was made by a genuine trans artisan, therefore it's better than any other objectively better merchandise. Then, that's exactly what ACON is trying to create here.
Well, I'm fascinated by the people who conceive of this. You're very data-driven, which is why we love our conversation today, and we love your work. But do you think you could shed some light on the types of people that conceived of this scheme? I want to understand the human face of this, like, who was at the meeting, who made the Excel spreadsheets, where did they go to university? Do you have any knowledge of this? Because
the spreadsheets are quite something that you've shown these, just the thing that outlays the points. I'm like, this must have taken a long time.
So ACON Pride and Diversity has been going since 2008, it started in 2008 when they hired a woman called Dawn Emsenhoff, who has a research background, and she is also quite data driven. And she's done research with the Kirby Institute, and you'll find ACON and the Kirby Institute have a lot of crossover, and they're often collaborating on different projects. And I think I think it's fair to say she's sort of a nerd's nerd in a lot of ways. And what I found really interesting is when I went back and I looked at some of the really old collateral that they'd produced, where they're producing these little leaderboard reports that go to government and consultancies. Like we had PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Australian Federal Police, and sort of that level of dry bureaucracy were signing on to the really early iterations of Pride and Diversity. These publications, they're so dry. They have graphs in them. They're just paragraphs, walls and walls and walls of text. There's no rainbows. They look like a prospectus for an investment firm. And they talk about outcomes, and they talk about, this many people are saying that they feel comfortable saying that they're gay in the workplace. And they try to link it to outcomes a little bit more. They try. Fast forward now, there's a lot more colour, there's a lot more advertising, there's a lot more kind of weird glamour shots of like trans women being promoted as, the new women in the workplace.
Better women.
Women Plus, I think, is the brand we're going with. And they don't bring the stats in as much now. It's very much this is what you should be doing, or if you're not doing this, then you're not keeping up. They're very much more manipulative, and they're very much more, I'd say more emotionally manipulative. So their pitch is less, this is going to help people, and you have all this unlocked potential here. You have these gay people who feel really bad in the workplace, and let's unlock their potential and make them feel great to be at work. And now it's very much like, well, if you're not doing this, you're a laggard, you're behind, this is what all the cool kids are doing, come and join our rainbow parade. And they do a survey as part of the Australian Workplace Equality Index. You get a couple of points if you get a certain number of responses to their extensive workplace survey. And they've amassed this huge data set with all of the survey responses over the 12 years they've been doing it. They've got millions and millions of data points across private enterprise, government, state government, local government. And yet the data they produce from it is pretty embarrassing, actually. Like, the people who are managing it these days, I don't think they understand how to use data. I don't think they understand trends. They definitely don't understand PowerPoint or like in presenting data, and they definitely don't understand Excel. As an Excel nerd, I'm quite embarrassed whenever I see them try to bring up these graphs and make a point with them. So,
is that a result, though, of the fact that they've been successful? Like perhaps back in 2008, gay people maybe didn't feel comfortable coming out at work, but I think in 2023, we've had the Marriage Equality Act is passed. Gay marriage is legal now. Like, I think discrimination against people, obviously still exists, I'm sure, but in a lot more of a muted way, or there's a lot less of it happening. Like, do you think they've been so successful now that they sort of have to hide those stats away because it would reveal that most people are just, cool with people being gay or people being trans or whatever, like it's no big deal?
Yeah, they're definitely not producing the same kind of stats, and they're not segmenting them in a way that makes a lot of sense. So they often try to make the case that if you're not out at the workplace, then you're not happy at work, right? And so that the way they try to correlate those two measures never quite adds up. And they miss really obvious correlations, like there's a huge sector of the workplace that are now transgender, like almost a third of some workplaces are now identifying as transgender. And then they will, without missing a beat, show an identical graph showing the people who identify as like man, woman, which are, one third, non-binary, 1/3. So that third of the workplace is literally people who have coloured their hair last week and declared themselves non-binary. So yeah, they've been really successful, and as a result of that success, in 2015, they actually made a conscious effort in the Pride and Diversity scheme to move away from gay and lesbian equality to transgender equality. So they could see that gay marriage was coming, they could see that we're in a much more tolerant society, that they'd kind of won on that one, that people were inclusive of gays and lesbians in the workplace, that it was no big deal, and that the real fight for them was going to be transgender equality.
But it just occurred to me, Kit, that they're in a race to the bottom because, the moment they came up with the trans thing, didn't someone in the room say, wait a minute, I just want to say there was a time when we thought the gay thing was going to be like around to keep us all on the gravy train for a while, and they're like, what are you talking about? This will go forever. And won't there be a day when awkwardly that has no purchase and my 1 point for my flag is worth nothing, and what are we moving on to?
Well, this is where the women's rights campaigners are sort of pointing into the future and saying, well, what comes after the T? It's Q. And what does Q stand for? Well, it stands for everything. It's unfortunately, like, Q means anyone who is different in some way or subverting your expectations in some way. Anything that is queer or queering. It's
like you meet someone and you go, oh, I didn't know you liked the Smiths or something.
Yeah.
And then they go, yeah, well, I'm just queer. And you go, okay.
That's right. I had a woman, a friend of mine, come out on her Facebook as queer because she felt that one time when she was younger, that she kind of maybe felt like she wasn't entirely straight. And she got a lot of praise for coming out as queer for that. So what is this? And obviously, we've got ACON. They're getting $21 million a year. What are they going to do? They're not going to shut up shop once they win everything that they want for the transgender crew. They're going to find something else. So I was listening to a panel that ACON and Equality Australia did last week with politicians in the upcoming New South Wales election. So this was, and Brad Hazzard, who's the Minister for Health here in New South Wales, he literally said, someone asked him about funding for the LGBTQ, and they said there's not enough funding. And he said, well, no one told me. If you'd knocked on my door, there's plenty of funding. If you want money, form a group and I'll give you money. Like,
Straight
this is
up.
a minister just literally saying, I have a bucket of money for you. Form a group, get a business case. Let's go.
John, queer podcasters. Come on.
That's right.
That's our
Well,
group.
we've been long advocating for the H to be added somewhere in there. So LGBTQH, that's us, and then
Intersexual.
we could get some of that cash.
It's the straight with extra steps, right?
Yeah, yeah. But so that's good to know that we can get a bit of extra cash. I like that.
Yeah, so this money's not going to, this is not going away, and this is not an equality struggle because now we have more than equality.
So is the hope that with all of your great research and hopefully people standing on your shoulders and us talking about it more, that everyone at their workplaces can start to be aware of when they see this badge and what they're being asked to do, and to, in the best case scenario, maybe start pushing back, maybe ask some questions, maybe getting places like the ABC to divest from this outfit if it is indeed a lobby group.
That would be my hope. So I think most people would actually have a claim to join their LGBTQ network in their workplace, because remember that Q stands for anything. I'm a little bit wary about advocating people kind of just like joining a community that might actually be is providing support to people, but at the same time, this is a way to get visibility over what's happening in your workplace, and a lot of the times, if there is a new policy coming in, for example, a transgender leave policy, that might only be consulted with the Pride Network. So that might not get wider consultation. And that might be the only way for you to get visibility of what's happening. So I'd say, yeah, definitely get some visibility about what's happening in your workplace and ask some of those questions. So, ask, like, are we a member of this? What do we actually get from it? Like, what's the value proposition for us? And do we need to keep proving ourselves against ACON's measurements? Because at the end of the day, ACON is not here to help anyone get better or get more mature at being inclusive. They do not measure the impact of activities on your workplace. They just give you points and they just give you an award. It's completely valueless. And absolutely, I want people talking about the ABC. The ABC is our national broadcaster. It's paid for by us. Its mission is to reflect the richness and diversity of Australian society, and to challenge us, to inform us, to bring us forward into the future. And they're doing all of us a disservice by feeding us these lies that that men in women's sports are the most marginalised people on the planet. Like the amount of gaslighting.
Most marginalised and always the number one winner. Like
somehow.
Well, Kit, we're very mindful of your time here. You've been so generous coming on the show. But before we wrap up, just in case we missed anything, we'd like to give you the final word. I mean, what message would you like to send out there?
I would like to say to people that, I guess, keep questioning what you read and read really widely. I know that there's a tendency for people to only ever consume podcasts or media or books that are from a perspective that you're already coming from. But read really widely and challenge yourself, and sometimes you will find something that is surprising. And don't be afraid to be that person who speaks up. Don't be afraid to start a blog and just get your thoughts out there. Don't think that you have to wait for somebody else to give you permission to question and to start talking.
Well, you mentioned reading in there, Kit, and we have the last questions we always ask. We'd love to know what you're reading right now.
Well, I read a lot of articles. I'm keeping up with a lot of news and views and boring articles. But I have just started The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry. And it's going to be a blockbuster. I'm very excited.
It's good. We've interviewed Louise, and yeah, her book is fascinating. I loved it. She was challenging. There was stuff that, just as you said about reading outside your discipline or your interest. There was a bunch of stuff that I agreed with, obviously, but then there was some really great stuff that really rankled me, and I've been thinking about ever since. You talk the start. She talks about Marilyn Monroe, if memory serves. Does she talk about him and Hugh Hefner?
She opens it with saying Marilyn Monroe and Hugh Hefner were born in the same year. And I was like, oh, I'm in for a ride. This is going to be great.
Only gets better.
Yeah.
Well, that's excellent. I thought for a moment there you were going to pick up a whole stack of Excel spreadsheets and go, this is what I'm reading tonight.
That's actually pretty close to reality. Which
is why we love your work so much, because you're doing, if there is such a thing as having a crack team, you need, I feel like we've got the mouthpieces, like Ricky and I can be the mouth, but we need, and I think you used that in your presentation, you used this image of Penny from Inspector Gadget. Every Inspector Gadget needs a Penny, okay? He is a moron and he would be no good without her, okay?
Yeah, but he's the figurehead, right? He's the public face.
Well, cishet, patriarchal figure, you need them. We've got that covered. So, you need someone to do all the hard work that we can take credit for later.
Go for it. I 100% want someone to take credit for all of this. Just take it and go.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Well, where can people find your work? Do you have a website, social media?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple of those. So I have a blog, which is ladykitKowalski.wordpress.com. And I have just started a new podcast with my friend Eddie Wyatt. And we're at welcometothedollhouse.substack.com. So we've published episode 3 last week and up to episode 4. We do sort of news and views and chit-chat from the gender universe.
I can recommend that podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I've listened. Thanks again, Kit.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys. It's been really fun.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the New Flesh podcast. If you like our work, please consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or even writing us a review. It really does help the show reach a wider audience. We'll be back with another episode next week. Until then, long live the New Flesh.